Hello, welcome to this corporate outlook for 2021 for the Netherlands. My name is Bas Visée. I'm a corporate partner at Rutgers & Bos in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Well, the subject of this video is in fact twofold. Screening of foreign direct investments is a hot topic in Europe. I'll tell you about the Dutch situation. There are new acts coming up. I'll tell you about the new legislation. And another, well, I would say, typically Dutch phenomenon is protection against activist shareholders. Well, there is a new mechanism to fend off such shareholders, and I'll tell you about that too, because also in that respect, new legislation is coming up. The screening of foreign direct investments, including corporate transactions, is developing all over the place and also across Europe. And well, the situation in the Netherlands is such that traditionally we had some industry-specific legislation on this. For example, in the gas sector or in the electricity sector. And there was a relatively high number of takeover attempts involving Dutch multinational companies in recent years. This has fueled political debate whether those companies should be more protected against foreign takeover threats. For example, we had the KPN battle back in 2014. American Movil built up a stake in KPN and eventually announced a hostile offer for KPN shares. They wanted to gain full control. The takeover was countered by KPN's Defense Foundation. That's one example. And the other example is NCC, a UK-based company that took over Fox IT back in 2015. Fox IT is a Dutch cybersecurity company working for the government very much, and of course a sensitive company for the Dutch government. And these two acquisitions, one just a try for an acquisition and the other one successful, those resulted or were in fact the occasion for legislation that was developed by the Dutch government to prevent takeovers of telecom companies that are of vital importance to national security. And the legislative process took a while, took in fact very long, because I talked about transactions in 2014 and 15 and 16. They came up with a first proposal, and only in October 2020 the new legislation entered into force. And that is an act introducing screening of acquisitions of predominant control in a telecoms party. The Minister of Economic Affairs will now assess whether a transaction of this kind results in a threat to the public interest, such as abuse or deliberate potential disruption of telecom services. And the minister has the power to require guarantees to address the threat, or may even forbid the acquisition. Under the new law, any investor intending to acquire control of a Dutch telecom party will have to notify the minister. And this new notification and screening regime is not limited to traditional telecom providers, but also to the new telecom operators like internet hubs and data centers. There is a three-step test. First step of the screening mechanism is that, well, you should acquire predominant control. And the second step is that acquired company or assets should be sufficiently significant to give the controlling investor relevant influence in the Dutch telecom sector. And then the last step is that it is up to the minister to decide whether it should approve the transaction or not. The decisive factor then is whether the transaction risks threatening the public interest. The screening is a continuous process. It operates not only at the time of the transaction, but it can also be afterwards. And well, that means that also afterwards, the minister can exercise the powers that he gets through this new act. The screening power applies as of the 1st of October 2020, but transactions implemented before can also be screened. They have not been notified, but now still the minister can screen them and may even influence them. There is a screening mechanism in place, as I told earlier, for the gas sector, for the electricity sector, and also other sectors are heavily regulated in this respect. And there's new legislation as to the telecom sector. And now there are plans to develop a sort of safety net in addition to the already existing sector-specific regulation. On 18 December 2020, the Dutch government approved a bill introducing a more generic screening mechanism for foreign direct investments in the Netherlands. Any investment in vital sectors affecting the national security will become subject to a notification and screening mechanism. And once the envisaged legislation enters into force, the screening mechanism will even have a retroactive effect. Namely, investments made after 2 June 2020 will be under that new screening mechanism. With these legislative developments, the Netherlands in fact joins a growing number of countries introducing this type of screening mechanisms for M&A. I mean, we know CFIUS in the US, and there are similar systems in the UK, in Germany. Either they are already in place or they are being developed. Once the bill containing the FDI screening mechanism enters into force, prohibitions are expected to be exceptional. I mean, the test, risk to national security, is a strong test, and only in limited cases that test will be met. Above all, the parties can expect additional administrative burdens and a possible impact on timelines in transactions, because you simply have to take some time for the transaction to be notified and wait for the reply of the authorities. Even so, the Dutch government has stressed that they do not want to pose a threat to the M&A market. I mean, the Netherlands is an open economy, is in favor of competition and free trade, and I mean, in short, the Netherlands remains open to investors. Under the draft bill, investments in Dutch companies that are fundamentally important for the continuity and resilience of vital processes or are active in the field of sensitive technologies must be notified to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. If the investment leads to an acquisition or a change of control. And the term control is really a term of competition law, and it should be understood in that sense. And in competition law, we're not talking about voting rights, but we're really also talking about de facto control. The draft bill applies to both Dutch and non-Dutch investors. And well, it's still to be seen how it will exactly look like, because the government has published a draft bill, but the bill that was approved is not yet public. It's confidential. It has been sent to the Council of State, Raad van State. They have to come up with an advice. And only if this advice of the Council of State is ready, It will be presented to the second chamber of the parliament, and simultaneously also the bill will be published. It's now still confidential. Yeah, increasingly shareholders are taking a range of actions to leverage their ownership position to influence public company behavior. And there is a new trend concerning defense against shareholder activism in the Dutch market. And that is the so-called response time, a new tool to fend off activist shareholders is the statutory response time, de responstijd, bedenktijd in Dutch. And the bill introducing such statutory response time is pending in Dutch Parliament now. The response time of 250 days is meant for Dutch public companies that are confronted with proposals from shareholders concerning a fundamental change to the company's strategy. The management board at these companies will be able to use this measure where shareholders have asked to put on the agenda of the general meeting a change in how the board is composed, or where a hostile public offer is announced or even made. Companies invoking the response time should use this period to consult all shareholders of the company, to consider alternatives and to account for their policy to the general meeting. During the response time, the general meeting cannot vote on shareholders' proposals to appoint or to dismiss members of the management or supervisory board, or to amend procedures in the Articles of Association regarding the appointment or dismissal of board members, either the management board or the supervisory board. So voting cannot happen, but shareholders may request to discuss these matters on a general meeting. So it's then just a discussion item instead of a voting item. The response time ends by a decision of the management board. Well, simple as that, because the start is also a management board decision. But shareholders can also challenge the response time in court, and then the Dutch Enterprise Chamber of the Amsterdam Court of Appeal can honor a request of shareholders opposing against the response time. And then there's one other event where the response time ends, and that is the day after a public offer has been declared unconditional. I mean, this is also meant to protect against hostile bids. I mean, in my view, it's not effective at all against hostile bids, but for other kinds of shareholder activism, this is really a new tool which can really work for listed companies. What I should say is that in September 2020, this bill was adopted by the second chamber of Dutch Parliament. It's now pending in the first chamber of Dutch Parliament. But recently, the Dutch government has resigned. There will be elections in March 21. And, well, it's still to be seen whether this bill will be adopted by the first chamber, so will really become an act before the elections. And there's also still to be seen whether there will be a majority of votes in the first chamber. So this is really a very sensitive bill, politically sensitive, and well, it's therefore a bit unsecure whether this bill will ultimately become true legislation.